This is my 124th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part will just be a brief one to preview the items that I brought back from the Great British Train Show in Brampton, Ontario, Canada this past weekend. I've lived in Canada for decades now, although I grew up in the British Midlands. Living in Canada, I'm obviously making things a bit difficult for myself by trying to model historic British railway operations. However, I'm not the only one. There is a local group dedicated to the modelling of British railways, the Plate Layers Society, and they normally try to put on a train show dedicated to British modelling every couple of years. Due to COVID, the 2020 show was cancelled, so the Plate Layers held their Great British Train Show for the first time in 4 years this past weekend, April the 30th and May the 1st, 2022. At the Recreation Centre in Brampton, Ontario, about an hour and a quarter's drive from where I live. I drove over there bright and early on Saturday morning to visit the show. The weather, fortunately, was fine. I'm afraid I didn't shoot any pictures or video at the show. I did think of it, but masks were still involved and I found it difficult enough just to get round and see things whilst wearing a mask without trying to deal with doing camera work as well. So I'm afraid all I can show you is what I brought back from the show. There were some interesting exhibition layouts on show, including live steam and a large Hornby Doublo 3-rail layout. Rapido Trains sponsored the show and also had a booth, and there were around 20 vendors. There are only a few local professional dealers in British railway and road vehicle model items, and they of course were there. The rest of the vendors were people selling their own items or part-time dealers. The plate layers themselves had a vendor booth offering for sale items from many of their members, and I did buy several of those items. I went with a little list of items that I was hoping to find, but expecting to find exactly what you're looking for at a show of this kind is a bit optimistic. As it turned out, I was only able to find one of the items on my list, some seated figures to populate the station benches on my shelf layout. I ended up buying a bunch of items that weren't what I was particularly looking for, but which one way or another piqued my interest and or potentially fitted in with my prototype and my layouts. Here's everything that I brought back from the show. 2 locomotives, several wagon kits, 3 books, some figures, a couple of wagons, a horse-drawn bread van, and a slightly incomplete Hornby Doublo breakdown crane which snuck into the end of my previous video about railway cranes, and a couple of little oddball items. This was my major purchase, accounting for over 2/3 of what I spent. This item was shown to me by a local dealer shortly after I arrived at the show, but I didn't jump right into buying it, as it was quite expensive, and it's a very large locomotive, too large, really, to reasonably run with a train on my small layouts. So I walked away to check the rest of the show, conserving my funds, but when I didn't find any of the specific items that I had hoped perhaps to buy, I decided to purchase this model after all, and it was still available. It did, after all, fit my prototype, LMS operations in the 1930s, and it was something of a one-of-a-kind item which rather appeals to me. This is, of course, a model of an LMS Beyer-Garratt locomotive. These were massive, articulated 260 plus 062 locomotives, built for the LMS by Beyer-Peacock to work heavy coal trains. A model of this class was recently released by Helgen, raising the profile of the class amongst modelers. However, this is not an example of the Helgen Beyer-Garratt. This is a kit-built model, with almost all metal parts. It only has one driving motor on the left-hand set of wheels, as seen here. The other set of wheels are passive, essentially like the loco wheels on a tender drive model. Anyway, this is just a preview, so hopefully we'll see more of this model in the future. All I can say for now is that it does run, although it could probably do with some lubrication at least, and perhaps more in the way of servicing. This was the other loco that I brought back from the show, rather a contrast to the Beyer-Garratt. This is just another Stanier Black 5, but it was reasonably priced, and it's a specific model that I didn't have before, Hornby 858 from 1987. It's tender-driven with a Ringfield motor. We'll see how it runs at some point. The 2 books that left were given to me gratis. I had actually been specifically looking for a copy of Red for Danger a while ago, so I was very pleased to get these. I've already started reading Red for Danger, which is a fascinating study of the history of railway accidents and the development of railway safety measures in Britain from the 1840s on. The O.S.Nock book seems to address a similar topic. The wagon kits at Wright were not something that I exactly actively sought, but building rolling stock from kits can be an interesting pastime, and these kits were next to gratis, only $1 each, and they do fit my prototype. The bag at bottom right contains an assortment of wheels and bogie parts. I picked it up for a couple of bucks as something that could well come in useful and would justify its cost as soon as I used even one of the items in the bag. This book I actually paid for. I have something of a current policy of trying to avoid buying books, as there are so many books in my house that I can barely move for them. But I couldn't resist this one, as it's spot on my prototype, providing scale drawings of LMS locomotives. As mentioned, I was actively looking for some seated figures, since I just put benches onto the platforms of the stations on my shelf layout, but there's nobody sitting on them yet. I bought 3 sets of seated figures. Unfortunately, all 3 sets are the same, but these were the only seated figures I found. I also bought a bag of hand-painted standing figures, some of which need a bit of repair to the painting, and 1 set of loco crew. I've got to get around to putting footplate crew into more of my locos at some point. I bought a couple of Hornby Doublo 2-rail wagons with simplex couplings, seen at top left. Under those is a boxed model of a horse-drawn baker's van, and under that is a strip of weights, always useful for adding a bit of heft to light rolling stock to help avoid derailing. I bought this 1 Triang Wren wagon, a long fruit van. Now that I look closely at it, I see it has been fitted with caddy couplings. I don't use those on my OO layout, so I'll probably replace them with simplex couplings, which is probably what it would have had fitted originally. Lastly, I bought this old Hornby Doublo breakdown crane. It's in somewhat dilapidated condition and missing its hook and 2 of its jacks, so it may not have been the wisest of purchase, but it'll be a restoration project. I only paid $40 for it, so we'll see what I can do with it. So that's it for this little preview. No doubt some of these items will feature in future videos. Questions and comments are always welcome. Please post below.